was in the 40s. So, but anyway, all in all, NBA All-Star Weekend, just top-notch, perfectly done, as usual. Great job, NBA. A little bit of final NBA news. The Timberwolves will return to action tomorrow night is when they are back now from the All-Star break. And it's, the question here in Minnesota is, do we want them to continue to lose and get a better draft pick, more ping pong balls, theoretically a better draft pick, or do we want to start to see some of that turning the corner and the young player development and getting some wins and coming together as a team? Me personally, I think it is no question about it. We want the wins. We want the growth. We want the coming together as a team. How many young, talented, star-type players can you have on your team at one time and develop at one time and then keep once you hopefully get them all developed 2 to 4 years down the road? All those spots are filled for the most part. We'll still get a lottery pick. It'll be a good player, someone that can come in and be a role player, a guy off the bench next year. But we shouldn't be looking to acquire another top 3, top 5 guy that's, going to need a spot in the starting lineup unless there is a point guard, that can come and replace Rubio and do that. Then that might be all right. But I'd like to see the wins because personally, I'm not sold on Wiggins. I'm sold 110 Bobby Caps % on Karl Anthony Towns. 110% sold on that kid. Zach LaVine, I'm about 98% sold on Zach LaVine. But I'm mostly sold on Zach LaVine as the starting 2 guard for the Minnesota Timberwolves. And if need be, point guard, backup point guard. Based off of matchups, injuries, lineup combinations, things like that. But I think you got to lock him in as your starting 2 guard moving forward. Plan on him fulfilling that role. I think it best suits his skill sets. That leaves me with a really on-the-fence stance with Andrew Wiggins, because if that's the case with LaVine, and Gorgie Dieng is locked in at your starting center, you're moving Big Cat to your starting power forward. We've got LaVine at shooting guard. That only leaves point guard, which Andrew Wiggins is not, obviously. And Ricky Rubio really isn't either. But that's a different story for another episode. But that leaves Andrew Wiggins at the small forward, which is his natural, air quotations, position, mainly due to the experience that he has playing it. But it's not his natural position when it comes to his size and his athleticism and all the physical skill sets that you really look for from a small forward in the NBA. The one thing I like about Wiggins being the small forward in between, playing the 3 in between Cat at 4 and LaVine at 2, is that's a lot of offense. That's a lot of offense to try to defend. Especially if you can, use some of LaVine's newfound point guard skills to help facilitate the ball around. And Big Cat's clearly got passing skills as well. Wiggins not so much. But Wiggins could be a T-Mac, Carmelo Anthony type of small forward from a production standpoint, where you expect him to shoot a lot and score 20 to 40 points. You're not looking for a lot of defense. You're not looking for a lot of rebounds. You're not looking for a lot of assists. You're just looking for points. To me, that's about what Wiggins can be and is. However, what has that ever accomplished a team, having a guy like that? Now granted, when you got a guy like that with a guy like LaVine and a guy like Big Cat, then you might have something. A la Paul Pierce. There we go. Maybe Andrew Wiggins is kind of a Paul Pierce, just without the outside shot and all the extra pounds. But anyway, that's where I'm left with the question marks. My question marks for the starting lineup. And that's where we need to lock in our starting 5 for now and moving forward. And then worry about the role playing, the bench, the schematics, stuff like that. Our starting 5, we've got 3 of the 5 locked in. To me, Dieng, Cat, and LaVine. Rubio, I do not like at all at point guard. I think we need someone better than him. He could be a fantastic backup point guard, but No, he's not a valid starting point guard on a winning NBA team. Period. Ever. The end. So something has to change there. And then based off of that, would have a big impact, I think, on whether Wiggins can work out as the starting three at the small forward or not. But it wouldn't. I would love to see Wiggins and Rubio go by and have a top-notch point guard like a Damian Lillard or even a Mike Conley or a Jeff Teague or something like that even. And then a good, capable... here's my trade proposal that they should have did. Okay, to the Houston Rockets for point guard Patrick Beverley and small forward Trevor Ariza, Andrew Wiggins, and Ricky Rubio. And we get like a protected first-round draft pick from him at some point in time too. Just to, sweeten the deal a little bit. That would have been fantastic. Now, unfortunately, the trade deadline came and went today at 2 p.m. in this afternoon. T-Wolves did really no moving and shaking whatsoever, not really to anyone's surprise. The contracts they have that they want to move don't make any sense for anyone to want to pick up because they don't expire anytime soon, and they're fairly large, and they're fairly unproductive players. Pekovic, Rubio. But there were a few trades around the league. None of them, really of any big name, though. I want to say, like, the biggest name I noticed was Lance Stevenson leaving the Clippers to go to the Grizzlies for Jeff Green or something like that. Like, those were the biggest names involved in a trade. A lot of other stuff was just bench players for draft picks and, things of that nature. And it's unfortunate because I like the NBA trade deadline and I like trades in the sport of basketball. I think it's an easier, it's an easier sport than football at least, to make a mid-season trade with a player and just have them come in right away and fill a role. And, you got to learn some new stuff play-wise, coaching-wise, but most of all, it's just, go play basketball for the most part. You know how to play basketball. Just get out there and play basketball. So, a little disappointed that, again, this year there wasn't much activity on the NBA trade front. I don't think it has anything to do with how their trade deadline and things are set up. Where I think it's, because it seemed like there were years where at least there was always one or two interesting, juicy, fairly big trades on NBA trade deadline day. But in the last several years, it feels like we just don't hardly ever get that. We don't get much activity. And I'm thinking, why would that be the case? And I can't help but feel like it correlates to changes in the NBA and players' unions' collective bargaining agreements and how they structure contracts, both to rookie players and then in re-signing free agents, and things of that nature, where a team can offer more to re-sign a free agent of their own than another team can, and things like that. And, you can only sign a contract for like up to 5 years. There's no 6 or 7 year contracts, but, there aren't really any 1 or 2 year contracts either. Like, everybody's got a 3 to 5 year contract, and just, I can't help but feel like the lack of activity in the NBA at the trade deadline is a direct result of changes that have taken place in the last 5 to 10 years in the collective bargaining agreement and how contracts are structured and money is distributed to players throughout the NBA. But that's just my wild, crazy, balls deep theory. But I think that's enough basketball talk for this week. That is enough balls dribble. Let's quickie in what else we got for topics, and then let's get out of here because, like I said, it is going to be a little bit shorter of a show this week than we're used to, just because that's the way it's got to be. Deal with it. Anyway, and we'll start the quickies with NFL football. I mean, let's talk just a little bit of football here. It feels like it's been forever here tonight, at least since we talked some football. So let's get a little bit of football talk in now. The biggest news, as of course you know by now, going on in the NFL football world is that I am currently getting to interview a former Vikings player every week, or almost every week, for a website known as VikingsDigitalDiaries.com. Last week I interviewed former Vikings wide receiver Matthew Hatchett, and it was an awesome interview. Please make sure to visit the website every Thursday, Friday, or just every day in general, period. There's all kinds of great posts and news and things like that on the site. But make sure you scroll through, find my Throwback Thursday interviews with former Vikings players. I couldn't enjoy doing it more, and we just want as many people to be aware of it and be enjoying it as possible. Now there is another bit of real, air quotations, NFL news involving retirements that we'll discuss here quick, and then we'll move on to other things. We'll talk about next week's combine on next week's show, as well as draft issues and free agent things and stuff like that. But there was two big retirements this week that I wanted to announce. The first of which was surprising to me. A very young stud linebacker for the New England Patriots, Gerard Mayo, has announced his retirement. I want to say he's only played like 5-6 years, something like that, just entering the prime of his NFL career, an absolute stud from day one here in the league, and he's calling it quits. So a huge shocker, continuing the trend at especially the linebacker position of guys in their mid to late 20s retiring, and a huge blow to the New England Patriots in their efforts to try and get back to a Super Bowl next season. Now, the other retirement in the NFL came today, as a matter of fact, and it hits pretty close to home for most Vikings fan, as it involves a player who spent a large part of his career, possibly, a longer stint here, I want to say, than he did anywhere else, decided to call it quits as well. And if you go to my Twitter feed at BDST Show, you can see my repost of his tweet, which is a 20-second video. And this is how he announced his retirement. He posted a 20-second video on Instagram and Twitter and things like that. And it was of him. I haven't given you the name yet, if you don't know. Former Minnesota Viking. Played in the Super Bowl this year. That was his last game, apparently. Well, not apparently. It was his last game. He was sitting on horseback with a cowboy hat on, and he announced how he is riding off into the sunset, and he rode away. He didn't get off his horse, get down to his knee, and rope any cattle. If you're not sure who it is yet, it is the great Jared Allen. One of the absolute best defensive ends and defensive linemen that the Minnesota Vikings franchise has ever had. He holds the single season record for the franchise for sacks with 22 that he got just, I want to say just like 4 or 5 years ago, something like that. An absolute class act all the way around. Phenomenal human beings. Great dude. Incredible football player. And to say that he's one of the best defensive ends, defensive linemen for the Minnesota Vikings, that is saying something, because for the Vikings, while we may not have a tradition of a lot of great quarterbacks or a lot of great defensive backs, we do have a tradition for a lot of great defensive linemen. John Randall, Chris Dolman, Keith Millard, Kevin and Pat Williams, Linval Hungry Joseph here now, even Everson Griffin now, Jared Allen, Carl Eller, Alan Page, Jim Marshall. I mean, it's a really, really impressive list of names on the Vikings' all-time great defensive lineman list. And Jared Allen's name is on that list. Now, whether he makes the starting team or where he actually ranks on that list, that'll be a different discussion for a different day. And I think we'll do that sometime coming up here soon. But not now and not this week. But so anyway, happy trails to you, Jared Allen. Class act. Best wishes to you and your family in all that you do here on out. All right, so that is it for NFL football quickies. When it comes to Major League Baseball, let's talk that next week or some other week, because there really isn't a whole lot of interesting news there right now. And, like I said, we don't have a whole lot of time. I'm trying to wrap